But those 96 men deserve to finally rest.
Before we get started, if you're into real stories from people who work in places the public never sees, the restricted areas, the classified zones, the places with protocols nobody talks about, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like on this video if you want more content like this. And seriously, I want to know where you're watching from and what time is it there. Comment below. I love hearing from you all. Now, what I'm about to tell you happened at Hoover Dam 3 months ago, and it's the reason I don't work there anymore. Let's get into it. My name is Michael Torres, and until 93 days ago, I was a maintenance engineer at Hoover Dam. 8 years I worked there. 8 years of inspecting turbines, monitoring water pressure, checking the structural integrity of one of America's greatest engineering achievements. I knew that dam like the back of my hand. Every level, every tunnel, every inspection corridor, except level 12. Nobody goes to level 12. That's the first thing they tell you on your first day. Frank Harrison, the veteran supervisor who'd been there 25 years, made it very clear during my orientation. Hoover Dam has 17 levels, he said, showing me the facility blueprints. You'll work on levels 1 through 11 and 13 through 17. Level 12 is sealed, has been since 1935. You don't ask about it, you don't go looking for it. And if you somehow find yourself near the access corridor, you turn around immediately. Understood? Why is it sealed? I asked. I was 26 back then, fresh out of engineering school, still thought I deserved explanations for everything. Frank's face went hard. Because 96 men died building this dam, Torres. 96. Official records say their bodies were recovered and given proper burials. Official records lie. Those men are still here, in the concrete, and level 12 is where most of them ended up. We don't disturb them. We don't go down there. That's the rule. I thought he was being dramatic. Maybe hazing the new guy with ghost stories. Hoover Dam was built between 1931 and 1935 during the Great Depression. 112 workers died during construction. That was the official number. Fell from scaffolding, got crushed by equipment, died from heat stroke in the 120-degree desert sun. Dangerous work, tragic deaths, but not supernatural. Just industrial accidents from a less safety-conscious era. That's what I thought for 8 years. I was wrong. It started 3 months ago with a routine structural inspection. We do them quarterly, checking for cracks, measuring stress points, making sure 760 feet of concrete is holding back Lake Mead without any structural degradation. Standard procedure. I was working Section 7B, a rarely accessed maintenance corridor on level 11, when I noticed something odd on my tablet. The structural scan was showing an anomaly beneath me, a void space that shouldn't exist according to the blueprints. "Frank," I radioed. "I'm getting weird readings in 7B. Shows empty space below this corridor, but according to the plans, this should be solid concrete all the way down to the foundation." Static crackled for a moment before Frank's voice came through. "What's your exact location?" I checked my GPS locator. Corridor 7B, level 11, approximately 40 feet from the western turbine access. A long pause, then, "Torres, I need you to stop what you're doing and come back to the main office. Right now." The tone in his voice made my stomach tighten. I'd worked with Frank for 8 years. He was calm, professional, never rattled. But right then, he sounded scared. When I got back to the main office, Frank was standing with Sarah Chen, our senior safety inspector. They both looked grim. "Show me exactly where you were," Frank said. I pulled up the location on the facility map. Frank and Sarah exchanged a look I couldn't read. "That's directly above level 12, Sarah said quietly. "Level 12 is sealed," I said. Has been for 90 years. Sealed, Frank said, not filled. There's a difference. He pulled out a rolled set of blueprints I'd never seen before. Not the standard facility plans we used daily, but older documents, yellowed with age, marked with a red stamp. Classified. Bureau of Reclamation, 1935. What you found, Frank said, unrolling the prints, is the original Level 12 inspection corridor. It was sealed in August 1935, 3 months before the dam was officially completed. These blueprints show why. I looked at the plans. Level 12 was massive, a sprawling network of corridors and chambers that didn't appear on any modern schematic. And throughout the blueprints in neat handwriting were dozens of small marks. Each one had a date next to it, all from 1935. Each one had initials. What are these? I asked, pointing to an X marked JM-7/3/35. John Morrison, Sarah said softly. Died July 3, 1935. Fell from the scaffolding into wet concrete. Level 12, Section C. They tried to recover his body, but the concrete was already setting. By the time they could organize a proper excavation, it would have compromised the structural integrity of the entire dam. So they left him. I stared at the blueprint. There were 96 X marks, 96 names, 96 dates. You're telling me there are 96 bodies still in the concrete? The official story, Frank said, is that all workers who died received proper burials. The Bureau of Reclamation couldn't admit they'd sealed human remains into the structure of a federally funded project. Bad for public relations, bad for worker morale, bad for everything. So they lied, made up death certificates, held empty casket funerals, paid off families. And they sealed Level 12 so nobody would ever find the truth. But it's been 90 years, I said. Why does it matter now? Why keep it secret? Sarah and Frank looked at each other again. Frank seemed to be deciding something. Because, he finally said, every 10 years, something happens on Level 12. The concrete cracks, just slightly, just enough that we have to go down there and patch it. And every time we go down there, we hear things, sounds coming from inside the concrete. Tapping, scratching, like something trying to get out. The room felt suddenly cold. That's impossible, I said. Those men died 90 years ago. I know what I've heard, Frank said. 1995, 2005, 2015, every 10 years like clockwork. We get structural alerts from Level 12, we go down to patch the cracks, and we hear them. All 96 of them still down there, still trying to break free. The next cycle is this year, Sarah added. 2025, 3 months from now, which means we need to start preparing. And since you found the anomaly, you're part of the response team. No, I said immediately. No way, I'm not going down there. You don't have a choice, Frank said, not unkindly. The Bureau mandate is clear. Any engineer who discovers evidence of Level 12 is automatically assigned to the maintenance rotation. It's in your contract, Section 47, subsection C. You signed it 8 years ago. I had signed it. I'd signed dozens of documents on my first day, standard employment paperwork. I'd never read Section 47, subsection C. Nobody did. What if I quit? I asked. Then you violate your non-disclosure agreement and the Bureau can sue you for everything you have and everything you'll ever earn, plus criminal charges for revealing classified federal information. You'd go to prison, Torres, for years. I felt trapped, felt like the concrete walls were closing in. When? I asked. 3 months, Sarah said. We'll monitor the structural sensors. When the cracking starts, we go down. Usually takes about 6 hours to patch everything. You'll be in and out by the end of your shift. And the sounds? I asked. The tapping? You ignore them, Frank said flatly. You do your job, you patch the concrete, and you leave. You don't investigate. You don't look too closely. You don't engage. Understood? I wanted to say no. Wanted to walk out right then. But I had a mortgage, a car payment, student loans. I couldn't afford to quit. Couldn't afford the lawsuit. Couldn't afford prison. So I said yes. For 3 months, I tried to forget about level 12. Tried to focus on my regular duties, the routine inspections, the safe work on levels 1 through 11. But it was always there in the back of my mind. 96 men. 96 bodies in the concrete. 96 sources of that tapping sound. I started researching Hoover Dam's construction history, found old newspaper articles, historical records, construction logs. The official death toll was 112 workers spread across 4 years of construction. Most died from industrial accidents, falls, equipment failures, heat stroke, drowning. But 96 of those deaths occurred in the final 6 months of construction, all of them on the lower levels. And after August 1935, all mention of these workers vanished from the records. I found a 1936 newspaper article from the Las Vegas Evening Review Journal. Small piece, buried on page 7. It mentioned that families of 23 deceased dam workers had filed lawsuits against the Bureau of Reclamation, claiming their loved ones' bodies had never been returned for burial. The lawsuits were settled out of court. No details were ever released. I found personnel records from 1935. Workers listed as terminated with no explanation. Their final paychecks went to next of kin, but no death certificates were ever filed. I found a photograph from July 1935, taken inside the dam during construction. In the background, barely visible, I could see what looked like a human arm protruding from wet concrete. The caption read, Level 12 South Corridor, Concrete Pour Section C. The more I researched, the more real it became. This wasn't a ghost story or a hazing ritual. 96 men really were sealed inside Hoover Dam, and something about them, something about the concrete, the pressure, the strange physics of being entombed in 760 feet of engineered stone, had preserved them in ways that shouldn't be possible. The structural alerts started on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in the break room when the alarm sounded. 3 sharp pulses followed by a computerized voice. Level 12, structural anomaly detected. Maintenance team report to level 11, staging area. My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. That's us, Frank said from the doorway. He was already in his maintenance gear, reinforced coveralls, steel-toed boots, helmet with a mounted flashlight. Get suited up, we're going down. The staging area was a small room at the end of level 11, just above the sealed corridor that led to level 12. Sarah was there, along with Tommy Valdez, a younger engineer I'd worked with a few times. He looked as nervous as I felt. First time? I asked him. He nodded. You? Yeah. Frank opened a locked cabinet and pulled out 4 respirators, the heavy-duty kind used for working in toxic environments. You'll need these. The air down there is stale, 90 years of being sealed up. It's not dangerous, but it's unpleasant. What else should we expect? Tommy asked. Cracks in the concrete, like I briefed you on, Sarah said. Usually in the same locations as previous years. We patch them with epoxy compound, reinforce with steel mesh if needed. Standard repair work. You've done this kind of thing 100 times on other levels. And the sounds, I pressed. Frank's jaw tightened. Ignore them. They can't hurt you, they're just echoes, acoustic phenomena, the concrete settling, water pressure, geological shifts. They sound like tapping, like scratching, like voices. Your brain will try to make sense of them, will try to interpret them as human. Don't let it. Stay focused on the work. He pulled out a large key ring with a single old-fashioned key on it. The key looked ancient, made of heavy brass, with a tag that read, Level 12, Authorized Personnel Only, 1935. Once we unlock the access door, Frank said, we go in, we work fast, we get out. Total time should be under 6 hours. Questions. I had 1,000 questions, but none of them would change what we were about to do. Let's get this over with, I said. Frank led us down a corridor I'd passed 1,000 times, but never really noticed. At the end was a door painted the same industrial gray as the walls, easy to overlook. Stenciled on it in faded letters, Level 12, No Unauthorized Entry. Frank inserted the brass key. The lock clicked with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet corridor. The door swung open, revealing a descending stairwell. Darkness waited below. Stay close, Frank said. Watch your step, and remember, ignore the sounds. We descended into level 12. The air hit me immediately. Frank was right. It was stale, thick, like breathing in a tomb. My respirator filtered out the worst of it, but I could still taste something metallic on my tongue. The stairwell went down 30 feet before opening into a corridor. Our helmet lights cut through the darkness, revealing walls of rough concrete, still showing the wooden form marks from 1935. This wasn't like the clean, maintained levels above. This was the original dam, untouched for 90 years. Sensors show the primary cracks in Section C and Section F, Sarah said, checking her tablet. That's about 200 yards from here. We walked in silence, our boots echoing on the concrete floor. Every sound felt amplified, bouncing off the walls, creating strange reverberations. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the wall to my left, rhythmic, deliberate, like someone knocking from the other side. Keep moving, Frank said without looking back. The tapping followed us. Started on the left wall, then shifted to the right, then above us, in the ceiling. Multiple sources now, multiple rhythms, overlapping and echoing until it sounded like dozens of people were trying to communicate from inside the concrete. Don't listen, Sarah whispered, but her voice was shaking. Tommy stopped walking. He was staring at a section of wall, his light fixed on a specific spot. Is that a hand? I looked where he was pointing. In the rough concrete surface, barely visible, I could see what looked like fingers. Not a handprint, actual fingers, petrified in stone reaching toward us. Keep moving, Frank said again, more forcefully. But I couldn't stop staring. The fingers looked fresh. Not like they'd been sealed for 90 years, but like they'd been reaching out just moments ago. The fingernails were visible. The skin texture was preserved. And as I watched, one of the fingers moved. Just slightly, just a twitch, but it moved. Frank, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I said, keep moving. Frank's shout echoed down the corridor, and suddenly the tapping stopped. All of it, all at once. The silence was somehow worse than the sound. We reached Section C. The cracks were visible immediately, spiderweb patterns spreading across the wall, some of them deep enough that I could see darkness behind them, gaps in the concrete. Standard procedure, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice professional. We fill the cracks with epoxy, apply mesh reinforcement, seal it up. Torres, you and Tommy handle the epoxy. Frank and I will set up the mesh. We worked quickly, methodically. I mixed the epoxy compound, loaded it into the applicator gun, started filling cracks. Tried to focus on the work. Tried not to think about what was behind the concrete. But as I pressed the applicator nozzle into one of the deeper cracks, I felt resistance. not the usual resistance of debris or old concrete. This was different, soft, yielding. And then the crack pushed back. I jerked the applicator away. From inside the crack, something was moving, something pale and wet, pressing against the concrete from the inside, trying to widen the gap. "Frank!" I shouted. He was next to me in seconds, his flashlight beam illuminating the crack. We both saw it clearly. A human hand, pushing through the concrete, fingers spreading, grasping, trying to find purchase on our side of the wall. The hand was attached to an arm. The arm disappeared into the concrete, but the hand was moving, flexing, very much alive. "Seal it," Frank ordered. "Seal it now." I aimed the applicator and flooded the crack with epoxy. The hand recoiled, pulling back into the concrete, but not before I saw something that made my blood freeze. The hand was wearing a ring, a wedding band, and on the inside of the band, barely visible, was an engraving, JM-1928, John Morrison, the man who fell into wet concrete on July 3, 1935. He was still alive in there. We sealed the crack, all of us working frantically, flooding every gap with epoxy, applying mesh reinforcement, doing everything we could to ensure nothing could push through from the other side. The hand had retreated, pulled back into the concrete, but I could still see the impression it had left. Finger marks in the partially set epoxy. Tommy was hyperventilating into his respirator. That was real. That was a real hand. A real person. "Calm down," Sarah said, but her voice was shaking too. "Just calm down. We need to finish the job." "Finish the job?" Tommy's voice cracked. "There are people alive in there. We need to seal the cracks and leave," Frank said flatly. "That's the protocol. That's always been the protocol." "You knew," I said, staring at him. "You knew they were alive in there." Frank didn't meet my eyes. "I've been doing this for 25 years, Torres. Every 10 years, the same thing. The cracks appear, we come down here, we see things we shouldn't see, and we seal it back up. That's the job." "But they're alive!" Tommy shouted. "How's that possible? How can someone survive 90 years in concrete?" "They didn't survive," Sarah said quietly. She was staring at her tablet, at readings I couldn't interpret. "Look at the atmospheric data. The air composition inside those cracks. It's not normal air. Nitrogen levels are 300% higher than normal. Oxygen is almost non-existent. Whatever is happening in there, it's not life as we understand it." "Then, what is it?" I demanded. Sarah looked at Frank. He seemed to be deciding something, weighing how much to tell us. Finally, he spoke. In 1935, the Bureau of Reclamation brought in a consultant, a physicist named Dr. Raymond Chen. Brilliant guy, MIT graduate, worked on some classified projects during World War II. The Bureau brought him here to analyze the concrete mixture they were using. They were worried about long-term structural integrity, wanted someone to verify the formula. Frank pulled out a small leather notebook from his vest pocket. It looked ancient, the pages yellow and brittle. Dr. Chen kept detailed notes, Frank continued. "I found this in the archives 20 years ago." According to his research, there was something unique about the concrete mixture used in the lower levels. They added a compound, some kind of experimental bonding agent, to make the concrete stronger, more resistant to water pressure and geological stress. The compound worked, made the concrete nearly indestructible, but it had side effects. He opened the notebook, showed us a page filled with equations and diagrams I didn't understand. The compound created what Chen called a temporal suspension field. Essentially, anything sealed within the treated concrete exists in a state of arrested decay. Time doesn't stop for them, but it moves differently. One day outside the concrete equals 1 minute inside. They've experienced maybe 6 months of subjective time in 90 years. They're not dead. They're not exactly alive. They're preserved. The implications hit me like a physical blow. So they've been conscious? Aware? For 6 months straight, trapped in concrete, unable to move or breathe, or we don't know how much they're aware of, Frank said. Chen theorized that the nitrogen-rich environment puts them into a kind of fugue state. Reduced consciousness, reduced perception. Like a very slow dream. But yes, on some level, they know they're trapped. This is insane, Tommy said. We have to get them out. We have to... A sound cut him off. Not tapping this time. Voices. Dozens of voices coming from the walls around us. Not words exactly, but sounds. Moaning, crying. The desperate sounds of people in unimaginable suffering. Section F is next, Sarah said, her voice barely steady. We need to move. We should leave, I said. We should get out of here and come back with a proper excavation team. We should... There is no excavation team, Frank said. The Bureau made that decision 90 years ago. These men are structural components now. Removing them would compromise the dam's integrity. 26 million acre-feet of water are being held back by this concrete. If the structure fails, it would flood everything downstream. Boulder City, Las Vegas, hundreds of thousands of people. The 96 men in these walls are buried alive so that millions can live. That's the math. That's murder, Tommy said. That's the job, Frank replied. Section F was worse. The cracks here were wider, deeper, some of them large enough that I could see into the spaces between the concrete layers. And in those spaces, in the darkness, I could see them. Bodies, or what was left of them. They were pressed into the concrete in impossible positions. Twisted, compressed, folded into spaces no human body should fit. But they were moving. Slightly, barely, but definitely moving. Fingers twitching, eyes opening and closing. Mouths forming silent screams. One of them was staring directly at me. He was sealed, chest deep in concrete, his arms pinned at his sides, but his head was free, protruding from the wall. His eyes were, open, his mouth was moving. I couldn't hear words, but I could read his lips. Help me. Don't look at them, Frank said, grabbing my shoulder. Don't engage. Just seal the cracks. How can you just... Because I have to. Frank's composure finally cracked. You think I want this? You think I sleep at night knowing what's down here? I've been doing this for 25 years. 3 times I've come down here. 3 times I've seen them. And 3 times I've sealed them back up because that's what the job requires. If I let myself think about it, if I let myself feel what they're feeling, I'd go insane. So I don't. I do the work and I leave. Sarah was already sealing cracks, her movements mechanical, automated. This wasn't her first time either. Tommy was standing frozen, staring at the man in the wall. He's trying to tell us something. Tommy, don't, I started. But Tommy was already moving closer, trying to read the man's lips. The man's eyes locked onto Tommy's face. His mouth moved faster, more desperately. Tommy leaned in, trying to hear, trying to understand. And then the man's hand shot out from the crack. It shouldn't have been possible. The crack wasn't wide enough. But the hand emerged anyway, fingers stretching, reaching, grasping. It caught Tommy's arm. Tommy screamed, tried to pull away. But the hand held firm, the grip impossibly strong. More of the arm was coming through now, widening the crack, concrete crumbling and falling away as the man pulled himself forward. Frank was there in an instant, prying at the fingers. Sarah! The torch. Sarah grabbed a cutting torch from her equipment pack. The flame roared to life. She aimed it at the concrete around the hand, not at the hand itself. The heat made the concrete glow red, and finally the hand released its grip. Tommy fell backward. The hand retreated into the wall. The crack sealed itself, concrete flowing like water, reforming, solidifying in seconds. That wasn't normal. Concrete doesn't move like that. Concrete doesn't heal itself. It's the compound, Frank said, breathing hard. Chen documented this too. The concrete has properties. It responds to threats. It protects itself. And it protects what's inside it. Why doesn't it just let them go then? I demanded. If it's responding to them, if it's aware somehow. Because they're structural now, Sarah said. She was checking Tommy's arm. No visible injuries, but he was shaking violently. Their bodies have been integrated into the load-bearing matrix. The concrete needs them. Releasing them would create voids, weak points. The dam would fail. So they're trapped forever, I said. Unless we can find a way to replace them, Frank said quietly. Substitute material, structural reinforcement, something that could fill the voids they'd leave behind. But that would require excavating the entire section, replacing hundreds of cubic yards of concrete, recalculating the structural load. It would take years, maybe decades, and it would cost billions. Has anyone even tried? Tommy asked, his voice hoarse. Frank looked away. There was an attempt in 1955. A team of engineers wanted to excavate Section D, remove 8 workers who'd been sealed there. They got 3 feet into the concrete before the dam started showing stress fractures. Critical structural damage. They had to stop immediately, seal everything back up. The chief engineer on that project killed himself 6 months later. Left a note saying he couldn't live with what he'd done, what he'd failed to do. We worked in silence after that, sealed every crack we could find, reinforced every weak point. The voices from the walls continued, but we stopped listening. Had to stop listening, or we'd lose our minds. It took 4 hours to finish Section F. We moved to Section H next. More cracks, more hands reaching out, more faces pressed against the concrete, eyes pleading, mouths forming words we couldn't hear. In one crack, I saw a man's face so clearly it looked like a photograph. He was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and a strong jawline. His eyes met mine, and in that moment I felt something, a connection, a shared understanding of horror. His name was probably on that blueprint upstairs, one of the 96 X marks, one of the 96 men whose families were told they'd been properly buried, whose caskets held nothing but sand and lies. I sealed his face back into the darkness. By the 6th hour, we'd finished. Every crack sealed, every weak point reinforced. Level 12 was secure again, for another 10 years. We climbed back up to level 11 in silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody made eye contact. What was there to say? Frank locked the access door behind us. The click of the lock felt final, like sealing a tomb. "Go home," he said. "Take tomorrow off. Don't talk about what you saw, not to anyone. Your NDAs are still in effect." "What happens in 10 years?" Tommy asked. "When the cracks appear again?" "We come back down," Sarah said quietly. "We do it again. And in 20 years? 30? How long do we keep doing this?" Nobody answered. I didn't go home. I went back to the archives. Spent the rest of the night reading Dr. Chen's research. Reading construction logs, reading everything I could find about Level 12 and the compound that had created this nightmare. Chen had known what the compound would do. known that anyone trapped in treated concrete would be preserved indefinitely. He'd written warnings, had tried to convince the Bureau to stop using it, but the Bureau had ignored him. The structural benefits were too significant. The compound made the concrete 40% stronger, 60% more water-resistant. It was an engineering miracle. The fact that it created a living tomb was deemed an acceptable side effect. In 1945, Chen had written a final report to the Bureau. I found it buried in a filing cabinet marked Obsolete Documentation, scheduled for destruction. The report detailed a theoretical solution, a counteragent that could be introduced into the concrete, neutralizing the temporal suspension field. The workers would age rapidly, experiencing 90 years in a matter of hours. They would die, finally, mercifully. But they would die free from the suspended agony they'd endured for decades. The Bureau had classified the report and ordered Chen to cease all research. Chen had died in 1947, officially from a heart attack. But I found a coroner's report that told a different story. A self-inflicted gunshot wound. Another engineer who couldn't live with what he'd been part of. The counteragent formula was in his final report. Complete chemical specifications. It could be manufactured. It could be used. But it would mean killing 96 men. Men who'd been preserved against their will, who'd suffered unimaginably, but who were still technically alive. Was that murder or mercy? I must have sat in that archive room for hours, staring at Chen's formula, trying to decide what to do. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Frank. "We need to talk." My office. Now. When I got to his office, Sarah and Tommy were already there. Frank looked like he hadn't slept. None of us had. "I'm retiring," Frank said without preamble. "After 25 years, 3 visits to level 12, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm 57 years old, and I've spent a quarter century being complicit in the torture of 96 men. I need it to stop." "What are you saying?" Sarah asked. "I'm saying I want to use Chen's counteragent. I want to end this. For them and for us." "That would kill them," I said. "They're already dead," Frank replied. "Have been for 90 years. We're just preventing them from realizing it. The counteragent would let them finish dying, let them finally rest. The Bureau would never approve it," Sarah said. "I'm not asking for approval." Frank pulled out a folder. Inside were chemical supply requisitions, equipment orders, work schedules. "I've been planning this for 2 years. Ever since the last cycle, I have everything we need to synthesize Chen's counteragent. I have a way to introduce it into the concrete without causing structural damage. I have a 2-week window when the Bureau inspectors won't be on site. What I need is a team, people willing to do what's right instead of what's ordered." "This is career suicide," Sarah said. "If the Bureau finds out, they'll find out," Frank said. "After it's done. After the workers are finally dead and can't be preserved again. After it's too late to stop it. Yes, we'll lose our jobs. We'll probably face criminal charges. But those 96 men will be free." Tommy spoke up. "I'm in." We all looked at him. "I'm 28 years old," Tommy said. "I saw a man who's been trapped in concrete since 1935. I saw him beg for help. If I walk away from this, if I leave him down there knowing I could have ended his suffering, I couldn't live with that. So I'm in." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My grandfather worked on Hoover Dam. Construction crew, 1933 to 1935. He survived, came home, lived to be 92. But he used to have nightmares, used to scream in his sleep about friends who weren't dead but couldn't live. I never understood what he meant until today. If he were here, he'd want us to do this. So yes, I'm in. They all looked at me. I thought about John Morrison, about his wedding ring, about the fact that he'd been reaching toward us, toward the living world for 90 years. About 6 months of subjective time trapped in unmoving concrete, aware but unable to act, feeling but unable to scream. "When do we start?" I asked. Frank smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Tomorrow night, after the day shift ends. We'll have 8 hours before anyone notices. That should be enough time." "And if it's not?" Sarah asked. "Then we finish the job anyway," Frank said. "Or we die trying." We spent the next day preparing. Frank had everything planned out with military precision. The counteragent would be synthesized in the maintenance lab using chemicals we could requisition without raising suspicion. We'd introduce it into the concrete through injection ports, normally used for pressure testing, drilling into specific locations on level 12 that would allow the agent to spread through the treated concrete matrix. According to Chen's calculations, the process would take 6 hours. The counteragent would neutralize the temporal suspension field gradually, allowing the preserved workers to age naturally until they reach their actual death point 90 years later. They would experience their final moments, the moments they should have had in 1935, and then they would be gone. Finally, permanently gone. It would look like natural deterioration, concrete settling, structural adjustment. The Bureau would never know what we'd done until it was far too late to reverse it. The day shift ended at 6 p.m. By 6:30, the facility was nearly empty. Just security on the upper levels, and they rarely came down to the maintenance areas. We had until 2 a.m. before the night inspection team would make their rounds. Frank had everything ready in the lab. Beakers of chemicals, precise measurements, Chen's formula written on a whiteboard. Sarah was monitoring the security feeds, making sure we weren't being watched. Tommy was preparing the injection equipment. "Once we start this," Frank said, "there's no going back. The counteragent is permanent. Are we all still committed?" We all nodded. "Then let's end this," Frank said. It took 3 hours to synthesize the counteragent. Chen's formula was complex, requiring exact temperatures and timing. One mistake could render it inert, or worse, could cause an uncontrolled reaction that might damage the dam's structure. Frank worked carefully, methodically. He'd been practicing, he told us. For 2 years, he'd been running test batches, making sure he could get it right when it mattered. At 10 p.m., he held up a flask of clear liquid. It looked like water, innocuous, harmless. "This is it," he said. "Enough to treat the entire level 12 concrete matrix. Once it's introduced, the temporal suspension field will collapse over the next 6 hours. By 4 a.m., it'll be done." We loaded the counteragent into injection canisters, grabbed the drilling equipment, made our way to level 11, to the sealed door that led down to level 12. Frank unlocked it with the brass key. The door swung open. Darkness waited below. "Last chance to back out," Frank said. Nobody moved. We descended. Level 12 felt different this time. The air was heavier, more oppressive. The sounds from the walls were louder, more desperate. It was like they knew, like the 96 men trapped in the concrete could sense that something was about to change. We set up at Section C first. Frank had marked the injection points on a map, 12 locations throughout level 12 that would allow the counteragent to spread evenly through the treated concrete. I positioned the drill against the wall. It felt wrong, drilling into concrete that contained human remains, but it was necessary. The drill bit through easily. At exactly 6 inches depth, I stopped and pulled back. Frank attached the injection canister to the hole and activated it. I could hear the counteragent flowing into the concrete, spreading through invisible channels in the matrix. "One down," Frank said. 11 to go. We moved through level 12 systematically. Section C, Section D, Section F, Section H. Each injection point took about 15 minutes. Drill, inject, seal. The work was routine, mechanical. It helped to focus on the process rather than think about what we were actually doing, but the sounds from the walls were changing. The tapping was becoming more frequent, more frantic. The voices were getting louder. It was like they were waking up, like the counteragent was pulling them out of the fugue state they'd been trapped in for 90 years. At Section F, as I was drilling the 8th injection point, I heard a voice clearly for the first time. Not just sounds or moaning, actual words. Please, please, let me out. I stopped drilling. Keep going, Frank said. Don't listen. But I couldn't not listen. The voice was so clear, so human, so full of desperation and hope. Please. I have a wife, a daughter. Please. I looked at the wall. In the beam of my helmet light, I could see the faint outline of a face pressed against the concrete. The man I'd seen before. The young one with dark hair. His eyes were open, looking at me, pleading. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. I finished drilling. Frank injected the counteragent. The man's eyes closed. His face seemed to relax. We'd completed 10 injection points when the alarm started. Red lights began flashing in the corridor. A computerized voice echoed through level 12. Unauthorized access detected. Security team en route. Shit, Sarah said, checking her tablet. Someone triggered a sensor on level 11. Security knows we're down here. How long until they arrive? Frank asked. 5 minutes, maybe less. We need 2 more injection points, Frank said, checking his map. Section M and Section P. If we don't complete the sequence, the counteragent won't distribute evenly. Parts of level 12 won't be treated. We don't have time, Tommy said. We make time, Frank replied. He grabbed an injection canister and ran toward Section M. We followed, moving fast through the dark corridors. Behind us, I could hear doors opening, voices shouting, boots on stairs. Security was coming. Section M, Frank was already drilling. The sounds from the walls were almost deafening now. Screaming, crying, begging. All 96 voices at once. All of them aware, all of them terrified and hopeful and desperate. Frank injected the counteragent. 1 more, Section P. Let's move, we ran. The security team was close now, their flashlight beams visible in the corridor behind us. They were shouting for us to stop, to put down our equipment, to surrender. Keep going, Frank shouted. Section P. I grabbed the drill, positioned it against the wall, started drilling. Federal agents, stop what you're doing immediately. I kept drilling, 6 inches, perfect depth. I pulled back. Frank attached the last canister. A security guard tackled Tommy. Another was grabbing Sarah. 2 more were running toward Frank and me. Frank activated the canister. The counteragent flowed into the concrete. It's done, he said. Then the security team had us, pulled us away from the wall, forced us to the ground. One of them grabbed Frank's canister, looked at it with confusion. What is this? The guard demanded. Frank smiled. The end of a 90-year-old mistake. They brought us to the surface, put us in the security office, made us wait while they called the bureau, called supervisors, called lawyers. We sat in silence, knowing what was coming. Around 1 a.m., the bureau's regional director arrived, Mr. Harrison. No relation to Frank, despite the shared last name. He was not happy. Do you have any idea what you've done? He said, pacing in front of us. Breaking into a sealed section, introducing unauthorized chemicals into a federally maintained structure, violating your security clearances, we ended it, Frank said calmly. We gave 96 men the deaths they should have had 90 years ago. Harrison's face went pale. You used Chen's counteragent. You knew about it, Sarah asked. Of course I knew about it. Every bureau director since 1947 has known about it, and every director has made the same decision, to leave Level 12 sealed. Those men are structural components. Their preservation is necessary for the dam's integrity. Was necessary, I said. The counteragent is already working. By sunrise, they'll be gone. Actually gone. Harrison stared at us. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. I need a structural engineering team at Hoover Dam immediately. Full analysis of Level 12 integrity. Yes, tonight. It's an emergency. He hung up and turned back to us. If you've compromised this dam's structure, if you've created any risk to public safety, you'll face federal charges. Decades in prison. You understand that? We understand, Frank said, and we're ready to accept the consequences. They kept us in the security office while the engineering team worked. We could hear them on the radios, running tests, taking measurements, checking stress levels throughout the dam. At 3:30 a.m., the voices from Level 12 stopped, all at once. The sudden silence was noticeable even from the upper levels. At 4 a.m., exactly 6 hours after we'd started the injections, one of the engineers radioed up, Level 12 showing significant structural changes. The treated concrete is... I don't know how to describe this. It's releasing something. Like the concrete is exhaling. Explain, Harrison demanded. The void spaces where the workers were preserved, they're collapsing. The concrete is flowing to fill them, redistributing the load automatically. It's like the structure is healing itself. Harrison looked at Frank. Chen's formula did more than just neutralize the suspension field. Frank nodded. He designed it to. The counteragent triggers a restructuring process. The concrete fills the voids left by the workers, maintaining structural integrity. That was always part of his plan. He never wanted to damage the dam. He just wanted to free the men who'd been sacrificed to build it. By 6 a.m., the structural analysis was complete. The engineers reported that Level 12 was stable. More than stable. The concrete had actually increased in density as it restructured. The dam was in no danger. Harrison sat down heavily. They're really gone. After 90 years, they're finally gone? They're at rest, Frank said. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're all fired, obviously. And there will be criminal charges. The Bureau can't let this kind of insubordination stand. We know, Sarah said, but Harrison sighed. Off the record? Thank you. I've read Chen's reports. I've read the accounts from the 1955 excavation attempt. I've read the suicide notes from the engineers who couldn't live with what they'd seen. I've known about Level 12 my entire career, and I've hated it every single day. What you did tonight, it should have been done 80 years ago. He stood up. I'll minimize the charges as much as I can. Probably get you suspended sentences, community service, probation, but you'll never work for the federal government again. Are you prepared for that? We all nodded. Then go home, Harrison said. I'll be in touch. I walked out of Hoover Dam at 7 a.m. as the sun was rising over Lake Mead. The dam looked the same as always, massive, imposing, an engineering triumph. But something was different now. The weight of it felt lighter somehow. Frank stood at the railing, looking out at the water. I joined him. Any regrets? I asked. None, he said. For the first time in 25 years, I'll be able to sleep without hearing them. Without knowing they're still down there, still suffering, that's worth any consequence. What will you do now? I don't know, Frank admitted. Find another job. Maybe teach. Tell people the truth about what engineering really costs sometimes. What about you? Same, I said. Maybe write about it. Someone should document what really happened here. The official version is a lie. The 96 men whose bodies are listed as recovered and properly buried deserve to have their real story told. Frank pulled out the brass key to level 12, held it up in the morning light. Then he threw it as hard as he could into Lake Mead. It disappeared beneath the surface with barely a splash. It's over, he said. Finally, it's really over. 3 months later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was old, from the 1930s, showing a group of construction workers at Hoover Dam. They were smiling, proud, covered in concrete dust. In the front row, I recognized the young man I'd seen in the wall, the one with the dark hair and wedding ring. On the back of the photograph, in faded handwriting, was a note. John Morrison, July 1935. My husband. Thank you for finally letting him rest. Margaret Morrison. She'd been waiting 90 years. Told she'd had a funeral, told she'd buried her husband, but knowing somehow that it was a lie. And now, finally, she knew the truth. He was really gone. Really at peace. I kept the photograph, framed it, put it on my wall as a reminder. The official report stated that 4 Hoover Dam maintenance workers were terminated for violation of Bureau protocols. We all received suspended sentences and 2 years probation. None of us went to prison. The Bureau sealed Level 12 permanently. Not just locked, they filled the access corridor with concrete, making it impossible to ever enter again. They couldn't risk anyone else trying what we'd tried, even though there was nothing left to find down there. Level 12 is gone now, just solid concrete, indistinguishable from the rest of the dam. No more cracks, no more voices, no more hands reaching out from impossible places. 96 men died building Hoover Dam. For 90 years, they weren't allowed to finish dying. We gave them that final mercy. We let them go. Sometimes I wonder if we did the right thing. If killing them, because that's what we did, we ended their prolonged existence, was murder or mercy. But then I remember John Morrison's eyes, the desperation in them, the hope when we started injecting the counteragent, the peace when it finally took effect. We did the right thing, and somewhere, in whatever comes after death, 96 construction workers are finally free from the concrete that held them for 90 years. They're at rest now. Finally, after all this time, they're at rest.